This tutorial will cover instantiating UDFs through a knowledge pattern onto points or elements that are created by a previous knowledge pattern. So in this case, I've created a spline which I put into input geometry. It's based on some points which I've hidden. It's based off of these points. And then I've created a knowledge pattern that instantiates points along this line. And basically it's a simple loop, and I use the function pointOnCurveRatio to instantiate along this curve. And pointOnCurveRatio function determines the ratio that the point is put along the curve based on what is in this section of the function. And I've used I over point count. So I is the iterator. I is counting from 1, 2, 3, 4, da da da, all the way up to point counts for I, while I is less than point count. And point count is my parameter, which I currently have set to 0. So basically, if point count is 10, the first point will be at 1 over 10, a ratio of 1 over 10, so 1/10 of the way along. The next will be at 2 over 10, 3 over 10, all the way up to 10 over 10. So I'm going to test that. Set point count equal to 10, and it evenly divides 10 points along this spline. So now what I'd like to do is create a UDF that I'll instantiate over these points. So I'm going to return this. I'm going to set this back to 0. And I've already created a couple spare points in input geometry, and I've created a UDF geometrical set, and I'm going to build a quick UDF off these points using only these points as inputs. So I'm going to make a circle, another circle, a point in the middle, midpoint, middle point, and another circle. And then I'm going to use the multi-section surface tool to create a loft between some of these circles. And then I'm going to join these two try this again. Join multi-section surface 1, multi-section surface 2, join these, and hide all this geometry except for the join, and this will be my UDF. So now I'm going to create my UDF by selecting my geometrical set, going to Tools, going to Options, Knowledge Templates, User Feature, and I'm going to call this bead UDF. I'm going to copy this for use later. Inputs, because I've named the original geometry start point and end point, I'm happy with those names. Have no parameters I want to publish. Output looks okay, good to check. It's just the join. The reason it's only the join, of course, because I've hidden all this other geometry. I can add other geometry if I want. In this case, I don't want to. And type. I'm going to create my type auto, the name of the UDF, generate, okay, okay. So I'm going to hide this. And now I want to test this bead UDF in a knowledge pattern. So I'm going to go to Product Knowledge Template, open a knowledge pattern. First thing I'm going to do is make a list, bead list. And then I'm going to make a variable. Let bead be a bead UDF. Bead equals, I'm going to open up the generative functions. Create or modify template. I'm creating a bead UDF. I'd like to put that in knowledge pattern output. That's going into bead list set, and I'm going to put it originally into location 1. Now bead has two inputs. It has start point, which I'm going to set equal to the original start point, and it has bead end point, which I'm going to set equal to the original endpoint. And then I close the function end modify template bead. And that's it. I should check this to make sure this works. It's good to do things incrementally. right click, execute an upgrade, and this seems to work. So now I'd like to transform this into a loop. I'm going to put the points back onto this curve. I'm going to go in here, and the first step, before I actually make a loop out of this, I want to test putting it onto two of these points. And the way I'm going to set this up is I'm going to make 2 point variables, point 1 of type point and point 2 also of type point. And I'm going to set point 1 equal to one of these points. I'm going to set point 2 equal to another one of these points. And now these points are still variables. They exist only virtually in the script, but that means they do in fact exist in the script, and so I can set them as inputs to my UDF. So I can set input to point 1 for start point, and endpoint I can select point 2. So the inputs will be these variables that only exist in the script, but these variables actually point to some points along that line. So I'm going to press OK, right click, execute an upgrade. So there it is. Now what I'd like to do is, rather than explicitly refer to these points, I'd like to refer to them as elements in this list. So every knowledge pattern, everything goes into a list. The points all go into this point list from this points knowledge pattern. So going back to this, I'm going to use syntax to refer to the first and second points in this list. So how I do this, I say point 1 equals pointlist dot get item 1. And what this does is return the first item in that list. I'm going to cut and paste this. And remember, that list contains points. It contains the points instantiated from that knowledge pattern. So for point 1, I have the first item in that list. For point 2, the second item, using the get item function. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to execute my bead function, and there it is. Now if I change this to, say, 20, this will update. Now I could also change it to 0, which would eliminate these inputs and break the knowledge pattern, which I'm going to rename to beads knowledge pattern, which of course I don't want to do. So now I want it to loop over all of these. So I'm going to go back to beads knowledge pattern. I'm going to create a variable of type integer, I integer, and I'm going to put all of this into one loop. I equals 1 to start with. For I, while I is less than, say, point count, do all of this. I have to change a couple things. One thing I have to change is, right now everything is going into location 1. I want it to go into location I. Also, I don't want to always instantiate this on the first and second points, so I'm going to change this to I and I plus 1. And I'm going to run it and test it. Execute and upgrade. So this is what I was hoping for. A series of beads along this line. And now I can play with this a little bit. For instance, I can go back to the points knowledge pattern, and I can edit how this is the ratio along the curve that the points are being instantiated. Right now it's defined by I over point count. I could change that to I to the 4th divided by point count to the 4th. And what I'm doing is the syntax for squared. I could do, for instance, I squared looks like that. I to the 3rd looks like that. I just picked I to the 4th to create some effect. I'm going to press OK. And I can see what it looks like when now that the points are updated. If I want these to run, if I want this knowledge pattern, the beads knowledge pattern, to run automatically, automatic execution, I need to make one change. Right now these will run concurrently. There's no telling which one will run first because they both have equal priority. If you want these both to be automatic, you have to make sure the points are running first and then the beads are responding to the points. And the way to do that is to change in the properties is to change the priority of beads to a higher number. Higher numbers run, I'm going to change it to 1. Higher numbers run second. And now I can change point count to 30. I can change this to 5. And so on. And you can see both knowledge patterns are running quickly. The points knowledge pattern runs, and then the beads knowledge pattern runs. And I could edit this UDF to include, to have this, the radius of this circle be variable to the length along the curve. I could continue to edit this in many ways. But this is the key idea of using the get item and referring to the lists, the get item function and referring to the lists as a way to refer to previous elements in other knowledge patterns.